share your valuable thoughts on this book.
First of all, for the record, I must say, I must tell you that I am a student of Professor Malshri Lal's. She was such a luminous presence in the Delhi University North Campus. Very young, and she would sort of float down the corridor, and boys and girls alike would literally swoon. So I have a very clear memory of that time. But you flagged the fact that teaching as a teacher of English, especially at Delhi University, and all those years ago when the curriculum hadn't changed, I believe there is some amount of writing from the bhashas now, at least at the graduate level, I believe. But back then, with all that Anglo-Saxon poetry, and yet I'm struck by the fact that there's none of that, as you yourself point out. You talk about the seasons as we understand it in India. There's a great deal of references to mythology. Again, maybe flagging the books that you have co-edited with Namita. There's all of that. I'm also struck by the variety of interests. This is not just a woman's voice that we hear. There is the range of her interests is quite wide. There is, for example, she writes about the widows of Vrindavan. She talks about the Kamadiyas. She talks about the Kamadiya Yatras. She talks about parenting. She talks about friendship. Now, these aren't just women's only subjects. Yes, there can be a woman's voice. Yes, there can be a woman's gaze and looking at the world. But the interests don't strike me as womanly. Not that I have anything against womanly interests, but the usual stereotypes that we have about a woman poet. I'm also struck by the tones here. There are some very sweet poems. There are gentle ones, there are philosophical ones, there are introspective ones. She looks at the rich inner life, her own, I'm assuming. There are some that are outward looking at the world around her. And there are these occasionally very whimsical poems also. I'm going to read a very short one. And there is a flash of very unexpected anger. I say unexpected because Professor Lal has this very serene look about her. But you listen to this poem, and this is something that as a woman, I think all the women in this room will understand. We feel that flash of anger, irritation. The poem is titled Blind. Blind, I had learned to chop apples. When that man groped me, thinking I couldn't identify him, I awarded him the badge of a bleeding nose. Now, I think this is marvelous. It's a very angry poem, and it says so much in very short 4 lines. It warns you, watch out. Okay, so Namita and I were talking, we had this little conversation earlier in the week, and we were saying that, it's interesting to read poetry, but sometimes it's important to know what is behind the poem. So I'm going to ask you, Professor Lal, about one of your poems, which actually I like all of the book, and maybe at some point I'd love to write about it, a sort of review, but I like the last section, which is called Women Who Wonder. Almost every poem in that last section touches you in some way or the other. Now, the Bindi is such an integral part of you. I think always has been. Perhaps your husband could tell us better. It was there the first time he saw you. But as a student, I remember seeing the Bindi. I associate that with you. You have a whole poem on the Bindi. Maybe you could read a little. It's not a very long poem. Perhaps you could read it, and you could again that it's not a wagging finger sort of thing at patriarchy. No, it isn't that at all. But you are drawing the attention of not just the male reader, but I think everybody. You're talking about awareness. You're talking about the supreme knowledge. I mean, we see the Buddha, any enlightened soul, we see them this mark of knowledge, as it were. So it's not just decoration. It's not just embellishment. It is something else. Would you like to read the poem and maybe talk a little about it?
I could read some sections of the poem because it's one of the poems that will be enacted.
Yes.
So it is true that the Bindi is associated with Sringara, and there's so much writing on the decorative side of the Bindi. But to me, when I'm also reading mythology and other stories that are in the folk imagination, etc., the middle, the center of the forehead is a power center for both men and women, for gods and humans, for animals. So this is the power center. So it appeared to me then that when every morning, at least most Indian women, after dressing up, will finally put the bindi, and quite often when we meet each other, as you rightly said, some are associated with a red bindi, some are associated that they draw a beautiful bindi every morning. There's some who wear small black bindis, there's somebody who wears a large red bindi. We remember that. So this is a poem that talks about the power of the bindi, which is much more than decorative, and asks the woman to recognize that as inner spiritual force. So it's called Bindi, the third eye. And I'll just read the last paragraph because that picks up from what you were mentioning, and you will see Anupriya enacting that poem. Why does the woman's daily self decoration